Hello, students. Welcome to video lesson 8-6B. We are continuing our discussion in this video on factoring quadratic trinomials that have a coefficient or a value in front of the squared term. Okay, they start with some number other than a 1. Now, in the last video, we introduced the window method, okay? So I'm just going to go over that briefly, and then we'll get to the full window and how do we find our two factors, which remember will be in those two sets of parentheses. How do we find those from a full window, okay? So we start with the window, and we put the first term of our quadratic trinomial in the top left box, right? We put the last term, just the number in the bottom right box. We multiply those together, and then we look for two numbers that multiply to be the same thing and add up to make this many x's. Okay, so this is the example we went through in the last video. So you can make this box again, and then we'll finish the process in this video, okay? So I'm going to skip over this stuff that we talked about in the last video. Remember the two numbers we found that multiply to be 30, right? Because 6 times 5 is 30. Multiply to be 30 and add up to 13 are 10 and 3. So we fill in our window like this, okay? So this is our full window, okay? And now all of the pieces of our polynomial are in here, and we're going to use this window to find our two factors, our two sets of parentheses, our two binomials, okay? So once we have this full window, we find our factors by finding the greatest common factor of each row and each column. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. If I go down to the full window here, if I look at this top row first, where this blue arrow is pointing, these two terms here, the 6x squared and the 3x, what is the greatest common factor of those two things? Basically what I'm asking is, what can I divide out of both of those pieces? Well, I'm going to deal with the numbers and the letters separately here. And I'm going to realize that when I have a 6 and a 3, they can both be divided by 3. Okay, and that's the biggest number that both of them can be divided by. 6 divided by 3 is 2, and 3 divided by 3 is 1, right? So I've dealt now with the number in terms of the greatest common factor. What common factor can I divide both 6 and 3 by? And now I'm going to do the same thing, but with the variable pieces. Do both of these have a variable on them? Yes. Are they the same variable? Yes. So I can at least divide away the x. Right? I can at least divide away the x. Now, do both of them have an exponent? No. I mean, this one sort of technically does, but it's just an exponent of a 1, right? Which means I can only take out one x. Okay, so remember that when we're factoring out variables, we can take as many out as the smallest exponent. So here I'm just taking out one of them. Okay, so my greatest common factor for this top row, 6x squared and 3x, is 3x. Because 6 can be divided by 3 and 3 can be divided by 3, and they both had an x that I could take out. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing, but for this bottom row. Okay, I'm going to do this, 10x and 5. So again, I'm going to think first about the numbers. I see a 10 and I see a 5. What number can I divide both of those by? A 10 and a 5. Well, I can divide 10 and 5 both by 5, and that's the biggest number that I can divide them both by. So I got to move that over where it's supposed to be. Okay, so 5. That's the greatest common factor for the numbers in those two boxes. Now, do both of those boxes have a variable? No. This box does not have a variable, which means I can't factor out any variables because there aren't variables in both of those boxes, okay? So I'm done right here just with a 5, right? And now these two pieces on the left-hand side, the greatest common factor of this row and this row, is going to become my first set of parentheses, okay? So part of my factored version is going to say parentheses 3x plus 5. because it's 3x from the top row and it's 5 from the bottom row. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing with my red arrows going up the columns. Okay. So now I'm not going to do, whoopsies, that's not what I wanted to do. I'm not going to do blue underlines anymore. I'm going to do red underlines. Okay, so if I take this left-hand column, 6x squared and 10x, and I want to factor out the greatest common factor. Well, I deal with the numbers first. I see a 6 and I see a 10. What can 6 and 10 both be divided by? What can 6 and 10 both be divided by? They can both be divided by 2. Okay, they can both be divided by 2. So I'm going to factor out a 2. And then the question is, do both of these boxes have a variable? Yes, they do. So I can at least factor out an x. Do they both have at least an x squared? No, just the 10x just has one x. So I can just factor out one x, okay? And for our purposes in this video, we're always just gonna factor out one x, okay? So that's the greatest common factor of this column, 6x squared and 10x, okay? Now I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm going to do it here with 3x and a 5. So the question first is, what can I divide 3 and 5 both by? Well, 3 could be divided by 1 or 3, and 5 could, I guess, be divided by 1 or 5. So I think the only common factor that they have is 1. So I'm just going to factor out a 1. And now, do both of these boxes have an x? Can I factor out a variable? No, I can't, because again, the 5 doesn't have a variable on it, so I can't factor out a variable that's not there. So from the top here, I have parentheses 2x plus 1. Okay? And now my window method is complete. This from the 3x and the 5, and this from the 2x and the 1, that's my factored form, okay? That is the final answer for factoring this quadratic trinomial. It's 3x plus 5 times 2x minus 1, okay? This is my final factored form. Our two factors are 2x plus 1, 3x plus 5, okay? They come again from the greatest common factor of the rows in my box and the columns in my box, okay? Now, let's look at another example where we're gonna do the whole process. Okay, we're gonna fill in the whole box together. And this one is gonna be a little bit different, a little bit trickier, because there are negative signs, okay, because there are minus signs, and we have to know how to deal with those. So I'm gonna start my window method the same way I did before. I'm gonna put the very first piece, my 3x squared, here, and I'm gonna put a minus 16 here. Okay, and then I'm going to multiply those two boxes together, and I end up with a negative 48x squared. So I really need two numbers that multiplied together make negative 48, right? Because I need these two boxes to multiply to the same thing that the other two did. So I need them to multiply to be a negative 48. And remember, I need them to add up to be this thing from the middle of my original, okay? So two numbers that multiply to make negative 48 and add up to make negative 2. Well, here's what I know. I know the bigger number is going to be negative, right? Because I need a positive and a negative here to make a negative when I multiply. Positive times a negative. And I need the bigger one to be negative so that it matches this symbol right here. So, okay, so what could multiply together to make 48? Well, I could do 1 and negative 48, but that's going to add up to definitely not negative 2. I could do 2 and negative 24. That's going to add up also to not negative 2. I could do 3 and negative 16, which I sort of just did before. Those are going to add up to negative 13, so that's not going to work. I could do 4 and negative 12, that's going to add up to negative 8. So we're getting closer. I could do, let's see, 5 won't work, but I could do 6 and a negative 8. hey, 6 plus negative 8. Right? What is 6 plus a negative 8? 6 plus a negative 8 would make negative 2. Excellent. So there's the two numbers that I need to fill in my window. So I'm going to put here a 6x, and I'm going to put here negative 8x. Okay? And now my window's full. Okay, my window's full. So now I'm ready for the process of factoring. I'm going to take this quadratic trinomial and I'm going to factor it into two sets of parentheses. I'm going to move these down here. So I have room to put my factors here so that we can see how they connect. All right. So I'm going to first go this way across my rows and find my greatest common factors, starting with the top. I have a 3x squared and I have a 6x. A 3x squared and a 6x. What can I divide 3 and 6 both by? Well, I can divide 3 and 6 both by 3, I think. So I'm going to factor out a 3. Do they both have a variable? Yes, they do. So I'm going to also factor out an x. Okay, so that's going to go there. If I go here in the bottom row, I have a negative 8 and I have a negative 16. Okay, so for right now, I'm just going to think about the numbers. Just going to think about the numbers. 8 and 16. What can I divide both of those by? Well, I can divide them both by 2, but there's something bigger than that. I can divide them both by 4, but there's something bigger than that. So I can actually divide them both by 8. Okay, I can divide them both by 8. So I'm going to take out an 8. Now, the thing to notice here is that both of these boxes are negative. Okay, and so you may be thinking to yourself, well, Mr. Freitag, shouldn't we take out a negative 8? And the answer is yes, we should. But the reason we take out a negative 8 is because of this box. Okay, so to decide if you take out a negative, look at this box. Okay, we do not look at the box that has just the number in it. Okay, we always look at the box that has the x in it. All right, always has an x in it. In this case, because this box with the x in it has a negative 8, I'm going to take out in my factor a negative 8. Okay, that's the reason why. We'll get to the other one in just a second. Now, do both of these boxes have a variable in them? No, they don't. This negative 16 does not have a variable, so I can't factor out a variable. So it's just minus 8. So my first factor, my first set of parentheses, you guys, is actually going to have a minus sign in it instead of a plus sign. Okay, it's 3x minus 8 because the negative 8 came from here. All right. Now I'm going to try to do my other factor by going up this way. I'm going to look at these two columns and try to find my greatest common factors. All right, so I'm first looking at this left-hand column, 3x squared and a negative 8x. 3x squared, negative 8x. So deal with the numbers first. Think numbers first. What can I divide 3 and 8 both by? Well, if we remember from before, the 3 can actually only be divided by 1 or 3, and I don't think I can do 8 divided by 3. 8 divided by 3 does not work very well. So I'm going to do 1 as my common factor, because I know I can divide 8 by 1, so I'm going to do 1. Now, do both of these boxes have an x? Yes, they do both have an x, so I'm going to take out a 1x. Now, you may be saying to yourself, Mr. Freitag, is supposed to be a negative 1x because of this box, okay? But it's actually not. So we never, ever, ever make the x pieces negative in our factors, okay? Never. When we're doing the window method, we never, ever, ever, ever make the x parts negative, okay? Never. Never, ever, ever make the x's negative. Are we clear on that? Do not make the x's negative. When you factor something out, if you also factored out an x, do not make it negative, okay? So when we decide to take out a negative, to decide if we take out a negative just number, okay, just number, negative number, we never take out a negative x, okay? This piece never becomes negative. You understand? Never. I feel like I've hammered that home well enough at this point. Don't ever make the x's negative for any reason at all, okay? So we're taking out a 1x. Now let's go to the other column, and we'll look at these two pieces, 6x and a minus 16. So, okay, so I'm going to deal with the numbers. I'm going to think 6x, 6. I'm going to think 6 and negative 16. 6 and 16. What can I divide both of those by? Can I do 16 divided by 6? No. Can I do 16 divided by 3? No. Can I do 16 divided by 2? Yes. So the greatest common factor of 16 and 6 is 2. All right. Do I take out a variable? No, because the 16 doesn't have a variable. Do I make the 2 negative? No, because which box am I looking at now? Which box am I looking at? Well, I'm looking at this box, right? I'm looking at this box. Is this box a negative number? Nope. So I'm not going to make this a negative number. This is going to stay positive. Okay, this is positive because this is positive. So I'm going to add another arrow here. To decide if you're taking out a negative number, you look at these boxes, okay? I don't care what's in the bottom right box. I only care about the x's. So my other set of parentheses is going to say 1x plus 2. Now, do you really need to have the 1 in front of the x? No, you don't need to have the 1 in front of the x. So if you just have x plus 2, that's excellent. All right, that's excellent. So we get this factored form of 3x squared minus 2x minus 16. We get this, 3x minus 8, 1x plus 2. What's a good way to check our answer and make sure we got the right two factors? Yeah, distributive property. In fact, double distributive property, so also known as the FOIL method, if that's the way we prefer to think about it. We're going to multiply these guys, and we're going to multiply these guys, right? The negative 8 and the negative 8. If you were to multiply those together and combine it all out, you would end up back here, okay? That's a great way to check your work, just to make sure, did I get back where I was supposed to? If you don't, you either did something wrong in your factoring or you did something wrong in your checking in your foiling, okay? Or your double distributive property, all right? So that is the window method in its entirety. We start with a blank window. We put in the first piece and the last piece. We find the other two pieces for these two boxes to fill it in, and then we go across the rows and up the columns to find our factors. If we need to know if we're taking out negatives, always look at these boxes. Okay, always look at these boxes. If you have any questions about the window method or how it works to help us find these factored forms, these two sets of parentheses, please reach out to me at some point, somehow, email, phone, or Zoom office hours. I'm always available for you. Otherwise, that is all I have for you, and we'll talk to you soon.